This is the unique set of life choices that I made that allowed me to be 50 and retired today. We recently discussed the importance of good decision-making practice and the huge impact these choices can have on our overall lives. This is going to be an example of all the decisions I made throughout my life that led to me being 50 and retired here today. No, I was not born into money. I had a very modest upbringing. My parents were good old Midwesterners that just wanted to work hard and very happy having just what they needed. I was different, however. I always wanted more. It probably started early with my fascination for sports cars and motorcycles, and I just always wanted those. So it was a very clear map to me because if I wanted these nice vehicles, I had to make money. Well, to make money, I needed to have a good job. To have a good job, I needed to go to college, and to go to college, I needed money. And the only way I was going to get money is to work hard and be smart with it very early in life. So that map was laid out at a very early age for me, and that's what I followed all through life. I made a little bit in basically allowance doing chores around the house, and then Dad started paying me to mow the lawn and helping him at his blacksmith shop. Eventually, I had my first external job, and that was a weekly paper route in elementary school. By junior high, I had a daily paper route, so I was up at 4:30 every morning peddling papers, and I added a second newspaper to the same route. So in driving or peddling the same route, I actually doubled my income. In about 9th grade, I started a job at the local restaurant/grocery store. And this was great because with one employer, I could be doing morning cooking or unloading groceries after my paper out. I worked about 30 hours a week during the school year and 60 or so in the summer. Nights I would cook in the kitchen, and on weekends I could cook or I could work in the meat market on Saturday. It wasn't just that I was working hard, I was also investing the money I made. There was the stock crash of '89, and I would have been studying and researching stocks and that up to that point. And when that hit, I gave it a few days of stabilization, then started buying in to be able to ride the wave back up. By the time I graduated high school, I had stocks, mutual funds, CDs, savings, checking, all that. In fact, when I went to apply for my first credit card at 18, they asked me what credit I had or what loans I'd had, and I'd never had any because I was just had the money, so I didn't worry about it. There were several themes I did write in college. One of them was working for the college. I started working in the cafeteria the first few years, eventually growing to having research assistantships. And the reason those were, I say, a little bit better or an advantage over normal jobs is because it was through the university. They simply discounted the cost off of my room and board, tuition, whatever. And that meant that we were able to avoid income tax on that money. I spent the summers either working construction or eventually having internships and co-ops. Even though the research assistantship and the co-ops and internships provided enough money to pay for most of school, I still took out any subsidized loans that I could. Subsidized just means that the government would pay for the interest while I was in school, and they wouldn't start accruing interest until after I graduated. This meant that it was interest-free money for me to borrow that I would invest, and then the profit I made on those investments would be mine to keep. Most importantly, I lived within my means. After the dorms, a buddy and I moved into a place that we sarcastically called the basement penthouse, if that gives you any kind of an idea what sort of pure disaster that place was. But it was cheap, and it had a garage where I could park the Harley and keep that safe. Also, when it came to food, I had a huge appetite at this time, and I kept a meal plan even after moving off campus in the dorm. So every meal, except Sunday night, I believe, I would just go over to the cafeteria and get my meal and get out. This means not only was it a cheap way to feed me healthy food, as well as convenience. I didn't have to mess around with buying groceries or cooking. I could zip from one class over there, grab a bite, and on to the next class. And those taking semesters off for the co-ops and internships did mean that it took me 6 years to get a 4-year degree, but by the time I was out, I had 2 years of practical experience in addition to research assistantship and everything else. And it also made me more money in the process so that I could afford to go to college and have very minimal debt when I got out of school. The first post-college job was a good job, and it was for a contractor that did primarily government work. That meant that they were limited in what benefits they could offer. It was not for profit. We couldn't get employee stock purchase plans or big bonuses or some of these other options that bigger corporations could provide. But what they did do for us is they gave 9% of my salary to a 401k, 403b, sorry, it was a little different class. They put in 9% of my salary, even though I contributed nothing, because I was wanting to focus paying my school debt off before I did anything else. I spent most of those first years on the road traveling for work, which means I had per diem. So things like food and fuel and whatever cost, I didn't really have. My rent was cheap, my car and bike were paid for, but what I eventually realized when I started crunching the numbers is I'd been going through about $1,400 a month partying. Not good, but I identified the behavior. The way I found to correct it was I bought a house because I decided I would be there for a while. And with a bigger garage, I went and bought a more expensive car because having the car payment would actually allow me to put the money into an asset, even if it's a depreciating asset, but it would keep me from blowing so much going out. A few years later, I refinanced that house. And at that time, what it would allow me to do is by age 45, I would have had the house completely paid for. I would have had the years necessary to pay off the yet more expensive car I just bought, and another 8 years to buy a different expensive car. And at that time, I think I was paying about $730 a month for a car payment and about $3 a day in food. This is in, let's say, 2002 range or so. So I didn't feel like I needed the best of everything, but I did like my vehicles, so I spent the money there, and I tried to be smart about money I spent elsewhere. Everything was smooth sailing on track, and then I made a big mistake. Not in deciding to get married, but in who I chose to marry. We were going to move to Florida, which means I had to sell this car that I loved so much at a huge loss just to make it worse, and the bike that I'd loved for almost a decade in a hurry. That means you're not getting top dollar, and it was late in the year. After a few months of being settled in Florida, my ethically challenged boss decided to go back on our agreement and terminate me. Shortly after that, my morally challenged wife decided that she went back on our agreement and divorced me 2 days after the last paycheck came. I'd already planned on taking a risk with this motorcycle shop, and I wanted to do that. And so with no other options and no car to drive back and forth, I moved into the neighborhood, which was not a good neighborhood, where my motorcycle shop was, so that I could walk back and forth from the apartment to the shop, as that was the only option I had at the point for making any kind of income. I basically lived on a oatmeal pack for breakfast and a 99-cent ravioli a day for quite a while. It was still a good experience in a lot of ways. I got to learn a lot about running a small business, everything from website design to sales and tax law. I also don't mind that I took a chance. A lot of people just go through life very much on the safe path and rely on that paycheck. And somebody told me years ago, nobody ever got rich working for someone else. It was an interesting thing to hear, and so I'm fine with the fact that I took that chance. I found something I loved, I wanted to pursue. I had nothing else to distract me at that time, so it was good timing in that respect. I learned a lot, had fun, met some interesting new people in a different industry. Fortunately, I was young enough that I could recover from that gamble. Eventually, I got myself in some legal trouble. Had to accept reality. That was kind of the final nail in the coffin for the business. Went belly up, had to accept that I needed to go back to the real world and get a job before I ended up in a gutter. I was able to go back to work with sort of a renewed energy and appreciation for the benefit of having a steady paycheck. I was able to take what I learned in that small business forward, including doing the small business in my spare time, and that had tax benefits as I went on through life. I needed a car, so I bought the cheapest car I could, just something to get by, and then eventually, as I got back on my feet, I bought something a little bit nicer, but not too extravagant, and kind of worked my way back up again. Once I'd maxed out my potential at that company, I decided to leave and move back to Texas and get into medical devices. Because I was making more money at the new job, that meant I was able to buy nicer cars. I was also able to save more money and invest more money and build my net worth. And a couple good promotions under the right boss helped grow all this even more. I was investing in the 401k, the amount necessary to get the maximum contribution from the company. I was participating in the employee stock purchase plan, and then whatever I had left, I tried to keep investing that in stocks, mutual funds, or whatever myself in something more liquid that I could easily access if I needed. If you think back to the resource basics video that we went over, most people start with their zero. They work their whole life and they accumulate wealth until their 60s or whatever it is here. And then they use that to live for the remainder of their years. And usually they end up with some surplus of money that they then leave to their kids or whoever has it. People can retire early a couple different ways. One of them is they can acquire money faster somehow. So let's say they get up here and they hit this point where now they can follow that slope down. Another option is maybe they get to a lesser point here, but then they don't spend as much, so they're able to get kind of something more like this. So there's several different ways people can retire early. As I mentioned in the other video, I'm able to retire early because I did something a little different in that I shortened the duration of my retirement. So if I only expect to last till, let's say, somewhere in here, well, that means that I can retire at 50 and then have something that looks more like that. The other advantage I have is that a lot of people, if they retire in their mid-60s, they need more of a cushion, right? Because they don't know if they're going to get 20 days or 20 years post-retirement. Since I have a little bit more certainty that I'm only needing, a few years worth, that allows me to rail this down to closer to zero in planning without as much of a cushion. So I've got a couple advantages here that work to my favor. Now, yes, having a failing heart is sort of cheating, I get it. But had I not made all those wiser decisions early in life, I still wouldn't be able to retire at 50, even with the health challenges. That 9% that first job was putting in for me into my retirement, even though I never put a dime into it, that turned into $150,000 eventually. The retirement I had in the second job, that turned into a pile of money later too. And of course, the investing and savings that I did at this new job that paid well helped a lot. Besides just the retirement funds and the stocks and bonds and all that, I also have equity in this house that I can cash in at a future point. The longer I can hang on to it, the more equity I build and the more it appreciates, which is great. And we'll discuss that in a different video. I also have a garage full of toys. And even though most of those are depreciating assets, they're also something that I can sell later if I need the money to survive. After the last heart surgery, I put everything in a massive spreadsheet and put as many variables in it as I could, and assumptions and list of assets and burn rates and how long could I live on this, that, and the other based on current market and real estate inflation and everything else. I'm working with a financial manager that's been able to tell me a lot of tips and tricks for this. Part of the challenge when you retire early is you not only have to pay taxes on the money as you pull it out of your 401k, but you also get a 10% penalty. However, there are tools like annuitizations that you can avoid that. And in my case, with a medical condition, I may be able to avoid it that way. Now, because I personally submitted for medical disability for heart failure, I'm in a little bit of a different scenario. So I haven't got that approved yet. I'm hoping it does, but if it doesn't, I have to be ready to be able to survive on what I have saved myself anyway. Just a few weeks after turning 50, I was in one particular meeting that was all politics and no productivity. And I had to think to myself, why am I sitting here with a failing heart still dealing with this kind of environment? So I had the data, I had my spreadsheet, I had a high confidence that whatever happened, I would be okay for the remaining period that I expect to last. And so I pulled the trigger and I submitted my intent to stop work at 50 years, 1 month, 4 days old. In addition to all that, I've also spent a lot of time writing books, making the movie, YouTube videos, and so the more passive income I can create, the more of a cushion it gives me, or the more freedom to do other silly stuff that I want to do in my golden years. Now I have to take what the doctors have told me as a best case scenario, and what we're finding out with more tests is what's more likely scenario, and kind of try to find this balance of making sure that I don't run out of money, but that I spend as much and enjoy as much of it as I can in the time that I have. Also considering that as I last longer, I'm going to be less active and able to enjoy less. So I really need to front load the spend on this whole plan. It's not that I made all perfect decisions in my life by any stretch of the imagination, but had I not made the good choices I did, I wouldn't be able to sit here now, 50 and retired, being able to comfortably enjoy what's left of my time here in my retirement. You can't be king of the world if you're a slave to the grind. But I can be king of my world now, thanks to a few decades of casual sense. If you haven't done so yet, please subscribe to the channel, click on the link below, click the little bell for notifications when new videos come out, check out the YCC merch store and see if there's anything you like, and live for today.